Welcome back to Breaking Spines, the miscellaneous book review show for reviewing miscellaneous books. I own a lot of Star Trek books. Not out of design, I didn't seek these out, but it seems at least once every 6 months or so, somebody unloads their own collection into the local thrift shops and used bookstores. You know, for a dime a pop, you can bet I'm grabbing them up. They do tend to be a bit more grab bag than most science fiction book series. The more anthology nature of the franchise makes for a wide range of stories, told inconsistently. They don't tend to have the same forward momentum of, say, the Doctor Who novels from the 90s, and they don't really build on the ideas of the past in any meaningful way, like the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Anything new these books bring to the table is often ignored in other books going forward, unless it's some agreed-upon miniseries, and I get the impression that nobody was panicking about any of the TV shows rendering this material non-canon. Star Trek books are fun, and there are definitely people who read and love them, but they do lack some of the gravitas some other tie-in books have. I don't consider that a bad thing, mind you. Not being shackled to a greater continuity allowed a lot of these books to do some weird, goofy sci-fi nonsense, and I'm so glad you all ended up voting for a book from the Next Generation crew, because I happen to have one of the crown jewels of, wait, what? Star Trek books. My, is that Wolverine on the cover? Who's in the mood for a nonsensical crossover? This is Planet X by Michael Jan Friedman. Published in 1998 by Pocket Books, this is actually the third attempt at a Star Trek X-Men crossover. There was a comic book in 1996 where the Marvel Comics trademark mutants met up with the crew of the original series, and a sequel comic where they teamed up with the Next Generation crew. People really wanted to make this work. The citizens of the planet Zaldia have a crisis on their hands. It seems that young people are randomly changing in appearance and abilities. A young man absorbs light from the sun and can fire deadly beams from his fingertips. A young woman can't stop moving insanely fast, making it impossible to communicate. One can change their height, one can create earthquakes, one unfortunate soul turns into a freaky frog monster that spits fire. The Zaldia government has no idea how to handle these mutations, so they just end up locking them all up and hiding them away from public knowledge as to not incite a riot. As you can imagine, locking up a bunch of young people without due process is going to generate some negative feelings, and before you know it, the prisoners use their powers to escape and go on the run, causing a panic. That sounds an awful lot like the whole mutant situation in Marvel Comics, so it's quite the coincidence that a whole bunch of the X-Men should find themselves teleported from their dimension into the Star Trek dimension where all this is going on. We've got Storm, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Shadowcat, Banshee, and Archangel, all just popping up at a Federation outpost without much rhyme or reason. They reunite with Captain Picard, Data, Worf, Troy, and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise, who work to find a way to get them home. But when everyone catches winds of what's going on in Zaldia, the X-Men and the Enterprise team up to figure it out. It's very tempting to just throw the book cover on the screen and go, Star Trek and X-Men, that's silly, and leave it at that. The tonal dissonance of flashy superhero antics clashing with space military adventures is certainly worth a chuckle, but I don't think it's necessarily a fruitless combination. X-Men is consistently politically charged, with its evoking of civil rights issues in its narrative, parallels to racism and later homophobia underlie the franchise. Star Trek is blatantly political, even during some of its silliest space adventures. Trek is a franchise that's perfectly comfortable sitting in a room and talking about blacklisting or contraception or what have you. Putting X-Men characters in the Star Trek setting would invite conversation on prejudice and the fear of those who are different from you. This wasn't really accomplished in the first two comic book crossovers, but with a limited page space and certain expectations from the post-Rob Liefeld comic book reader, that really isn't a surprise. With a novel, you have more space to breathe and explore certain topics, show the internal thoughts of characters, have more than a few word balloons worth of conversation, and the expectations of someone reading a novel are different than those reading novelty comic books. As you probably guessed by now, Planet X does not take advantage of these opportunities. Oh, it starts promising enough. The idea of what if X-Men style mutations start happening in the world of Star Trek is a solid hook to hang your ideas off of, and the X-Men show up immediately, like for real, first thing that happens in the book. Chapter 1, page 1, the X-Men are mysteriously teleported into the Star Trek dimension. It sets a precedent of, okay, we all know what we're here for, let's not dawdle. But boy, does this book end up dawdling. The pacing is just crap. Our heroes don't discover what's going on Zaldia until halfway through the book. The central conflict doesn't kick into gear until 130 pages in, meaning you just have the X-Men and the Enterprise crew just kind of twiddling their thumbs at each other. Here's the vast majority of scenes in the first half of this book. An X-Men character and a Star Trek character are in the same room. One of them says, "Man, we sure do have this thing in our franchise," and then the other character says, "Oh really? We have a similar thing in our franchise." How does Nightcrawler's teleportation powers compare to transport technology? How does Archangel's metallic wings compare to Borg assimilation? Little geeky comparison moments like that. And that's perfectly fine as a side dish. You have a lot of small character moments that would be cute and endearing as a supplement to an actual central plot. You got Guinan serving drinks to Wolverine, Banshee and Data singing a duet, Picard and Storm being a little flirty with each other, which, okay. They're okay moments in theory, but it's not story. None of this is setup. None of this has a payoff later down the line. They're just two characters in a room having little moments and comparing notes between their respective franchises. And it's always just two characters. There's never three. There's nothing to shake up this formula. It gets repetitive really quickly. And it's not like they're especially great character moments either. A lot of the interaction is just comparing concepts and continuity. There's not much in the way of meaningful characterization outside of Worf and Wolverine really get along, which, that's a no-brainer. There's also an annoying habit of reintroducing and redescribing the X-Men characters every time a character sees them for the first time. We may have already seen Storm interact with Picard, Riker, and Dr. Crusher, but when she interacts with Troy for the first time, she has to be introduced as the mutant known as Storm. We know who Storm is! You introduced this character 100 pages ago. We can keep track of these things. No, I don't want to hear about how Geordi thinks Wolverine's yellow costume is weird. I already heard it from the rest of the crew. What's that? Nightcrawler's teleportation gives off a smell of sulfur? Wow, you told me that 6 times already. If I could just make a few geeky nitpicks just for myself, Shadowcat, aka Kitty Pryde, is my absolute favorite X-Men ever, and she doesn't do anything in this book. She doesn't have any of these one-on-one moments, and her impact when the actual plot kicks into gear is minimal. She walks through walls and knows martial arts and has a pet dragon, and she once ripped out Emma Frost's heart. She would own Khan, is all I'm saying. Also, this isn't the book's fault, but this is around the time Wolverine had crappy bone claws, which I will never not think are lame. So the second half of the book kicks in, our heroes finally decide to be part of the plot, and it all pretty much dissolves into action set pieces. A third party shows up 2/3 of the way into the book, a bunch of nasty evil aliens that weren't set up in any way, they weren't hinted at. They're basically there to give our heroes something to shoot at indiscriminately. Young adults being incarcerated because they're different? That's a delicate issue that requires a lot of thought and debate and consideration. Boring. Here's some lizard people for Worf and Banshee to kill. This is the real reason the X-Men are in this story. Action in Star Trek tends to be pretty samey, just people behind metal boxes trading phaser blasts. Throwing in a bunch of superheroes with a vast array of powers spices that up a bit. They're not here for thematic resonance, they're here to inject some adrenaline into the talky space show. It's the least interesting thing you could have done with the X-Men in this setting. This whole book just needs an overhaul. Get the main characters involved with the plot sooner. Make the X-Men's introductions feel less coincidental. It's not a coincidence because both the Star Trek and Marvel universes have all-powerful beings who get involved in the fates of insignificant mortals, but saying a wizard did it is still kinda weak even if the wizard's been long established. You can have a card learn about Zaldia and go, hey, this reminds me of those X-Men we met in that alternate dimension. Let's see if we can technobabble up a dimensional portal and ask them for advice. Don't idle. Make your protagonists involved early on. You can still have those small one-on-one character moments because space flight takes a while, but now they're supplementing the story instead of distracting us from it. If you have to have evil space lizards, build up to them. Don't just have them suddenly appear without warning. You can't have suspense for things you don't establish. I suppose choosing to default into action sequences rather than engaging with the political text of the plot is a matter of taste. I don't want to be too much of a snob, but if you're going to make a shooty story instead of a talky story, maybe don't spend so much time with characters talking. And if they're going to talk, have them talk about things that are going to have payoff. Basically, everything this book does, do the opposite. So would I recommend Planet X? You know, it's lame. It's super lame. It takes a weird, out there premise and fumbles it pretty badly. This book is a good case study in the importance of structure, a great example of how not to pace your story. But at the same time, the mere existence of a Star Trek X-Men crossover novel is odd enough that you'll probably be entertained on the novelty alone. The characters are fine if underwritten. It has some ideas. It doesn't really challenge the reader in any way, which sucks on some levels but means that there's fewer things to mess up. It's a quick, inoffensive read, something that probably isn't worth hunting down, but if you happen to have it, well, with its short chapter structure, it makes for an okay bathroom book. So, on to the polls. Let's keep talking about other media. Star Trek is a largely television-based franchise, so let's go into the film business. For the next episode, we could talk about a film novelization, a book sequel to a film, that is to say a film that didn't get a sequel in theaters but got one on bookshelves, or a book with a plot about making films. Leave your vote in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and keep on breaking spines.